And now, a passage from Joseph B. Balestier, the first American consul in Singapore, 1833 to 1852. 1. American interests in insular Southeast Asia arose largely as a result of the American War of Independence. Prior to this period, the maritime economy of America, particularly that of the New England colonies, rested on the triangular trade between New England, the West Indies, and the Gold Coast of Africa. But when the American colonies gained their independence from Great Britain, one of the consequences was the closure of the British West Indian islands to New England traders. In addition, the French also shut off their islands from American trade because the Peace Convention between America and Great Britain, 1781, was interpreted as a violation of the Franco-American Alliance of 1778. This being the case, the Americans were forced to find alternative avenues of trade, and in this search, they went to the Baltic, the Mediterranean, and most important of all, to the Far East. To this latter channel of trade, the most coveted goal was Canton, but the East Indies also fitted into the pattern of trade. From 1784, American vessels began to visit the East in growing numbers and conducted a substantial volume of trade. With increasing trade, the United States set up consulates for the purpose of safeguarding and expanding their commerce in particular, and for looking after the welfare of Americans in the far-off lands in general. Singapore was founded in 1819, and it soon became a great entrepot center. Singapore did not produce or manufacture anything of her own, but by virtue of her geographical position and her free port status, she became the center for the exchange of produce and manufactures of Europe, India, and China, for the produce of the Malay archipelago and the adjacent Asian states of Siam, Cochin China, Cambodia, and the East Indies. While the great volume of trade came from Great Britain, Europe, and India, Singapore also traded with other countries like Australia, Mauritius, Arabia, and the United States. The importance of Singapore soon became evident to the Americans, who by this time were already most familiar with the eastern seas. And so they came to trade in Singapore, their merchant ships adding to the number of foreigners who by now were frequenting this port. Very important was the fact that the Americans most commonly brought specie to invest in Eastern produce, and hence they were warmly welcomed because they were extremely valuable customers. This continued until 1825, when the Larne incident occurred. This incident had the effect of deterring the Americans from coming to Singapore, and they no longer ventured to trade openly with the free port. 2. This was the situation in 1833 when the United States government decided to appoint a consul for this region. Singapore would have been the obvious place for this consulate, and Joseph Balestier, the man appointed, had already discussed with the Secretary of State in Washington that a direct appointment for Singapore should be made. But since it appeared that there was some doubt about Americans having a right to trade at Singapore, Balestier's commission was made out for Riau and such other places as are nearer thereto than to the residence of any other consul or vice-consul of the United States. Balestier left the port of Philadelphia in December 1833 and reached Riau in May the following year. He then appeared before the resident of Riau and presented his commission from President Andrew Jackson, requesting that he be permitted fully and peacefully to enjoy and exercise his office without molestation or trouble, but be afforded all proper convenience and assistance. Riau being a dependency of the Dutch East Indies, Balestier's next job was to write to the Governor-General of Java to get his appointment recognized. Although Balestier was the American consul at Riau, he resided in Singapore. This was, as he explained, because of the fact that Riau was commercially insignificant, there being not a single European merchant there, and despite its fine harbor, not a single trading vessel was to be seen. The only European population was the Dutch resident and a small Dutch garrison. Singapore, on the other hand, although 40 miles away, offered a wider field of commercial usefulness. Furthermore, Balestier had been permitted by the acting resident of Singapore, Mr. S.G. Bonham, to act in an official capacity towards ships and citizens of the United States. Very soon, however, Balestier was made to feel uncertain about his status as consul, and he wrote to complain to the Department of State. He had received a letter dated February 21, 1834, from the Secretary of State about his commission, and in this letter, the wording of his commission was entirely different from the original. This time it was stated that he was restricted to act only at Riau, as in such other ports as are nearer thereto than to the residence of any consul or vice consul of the United States within the same allegiance. The inclusion of the last four words meant that Balestier could not act in an official capacity at Singapore because it was not within Dutch allegiance. This puzzled Balestier, as Singapore, from a commercial point of view at least, was really where a consul should be stationed. Balestier explained that since his arrival at Singapore, he had facilitated the commercial transactions of 4 American ships. Not a single ship had resorted to Riau, while his presence at Singapore had in fact induced a large number of American ships to visit and touch at that port because of the security provided in having an agent of the United States to advise with. Balestier therefore requested the Secretary of State to restore him to his former footing or to give him a new appointment as consul at Riau and Singapore. Because Americans were technically excluded from trading at Singapore, Balestier felt that such an appointment was important, so that instead of such an appointment being viewed in an unfavorable manner by the officers of the company, I am satisfied that although under existing circumstances I could not expect to be fully acknowledged, yet it will be considered as proof that our government is desirous to cultivate commercial relations with this place. Balestier continually complained of his status, and then in May 1835, he reported that the Court of Directors in India had, in a public general letter dated 4th May 1831, permitted Americans to trade at Singapore on the grounds that it was united with Malacca and the Prince of Wales Island as the Straits Settlements. Article 3 of the Convention of Commerce of July 3rd, 1815, of course gave Americans the right to trade with Prince of Wales Island. With this new order of things, Balestier once again wrote to ask that the president make a new appointment by removing him from Riau and placing him at Singapore. But it was not till 12th April 1837 that Balestier learnt that he had been appointed consul for Singapore, as from 6 July 1836. In June 1837, Balestier received the assent of the Honorable East India Company for him to act as consul, and on the 14th June 1837, there appeared the following advertisement in one of the local newspapers, the Free Press. The undersigned having been appointed on the 4th July 1836 by the President of the United States by and with the advice of the Senate, Consul of the United States for the island of Singapore, and having received the recognition of his appointment by the Honorable, the Court of Directors at London on 23rd November, hereby gives notice to those concerned that he has entered upon the duties of his office. Signed, Joseph Balestier. 3. Balestier's job as consul at Singapore was primarily that of fostering American trade. Consequently, he was extremely vexed over the problem that Americans were excluded from trading at Singapore. This was because the 1815 convention admitted American vessels only to Calcutta, Madras, Bombay, and Prince of Wales Island. It was therefore through a historical accident that Singapore, established in 1819, was excluded from the list of ports. From the very beginning, Balestier noted with regret that no order has yet been here received to open Singapore to our trade, but I cannot but believe that the negotiations with Great Britain in relation thereto will lead to an early removal of the restrictions imposed only upon our flag. In his letters to the Secretary of State, Balestier persistently impressed upon him the advantages of getting this legal impediment to American trade removed. In practice, however, the Americans conducted an increasing amount of trade with Singapore by resorting to the island of Batam, 14 miles away, and transshipping their cargoes to and from Singapore in local boats. In fact, Balestier had received verbal intimations from Captain Vassal of the HMS Harner and positive verbal assurance from the governor of the Straits Settlements of their determination to abstain from molesting any American ship that chose to trade at Singapore. Nevertheless, even these assurances from such high sources did not convince American traders sufficiently as to divert them from their indirect mode of trading. The merchant community in Singapore also tried very hard to legalize American trade, but their labors did not bear fruit till June 1836, when American trade was finally declared legal. The other official duties of Balestier as consul were very varied in nature. A constant chore was to look after and be responsible for the welfare of American seamen who came to Singapore. Lack of funds and the need for constant reference to Washington on this matter must have made Balestier's work more difficult and perhaps irritating. In August 1835, for instance, Balestier had to deal with the problem of a certain W.C. Farewell, second mate on board the ship Rome of Salem, who had refused to obey the orders of Captain Horace H. Jenks and his first mate. Subsequently, Farewell stabbed the captain, the first mate, and another seaman. Since Captain Jenks did not feel that he or his property would be safe as long as the prisoner was aboard, he requested Balestier to detain him until he could be sent for trial in the United States. This Balestier did and placed the prisoner in the local jail at the cost of $3 per week. This was only part of the problem. Sometimes Balestier could not get an American ship to accommodate an American sailor back home, as in the case of Martin Mucam, whom Balestier could not get on board the Louvre, captained by Blackler. Mucam's expenses had been very considerable, and since it would continue to be so, Balestier complained to the Secretary of State. He must have been quite frustrated to receive the letter from the district attorney's office at Boston, who accepted Captain Blackler's explanation and hence refused to take any action. The other money-consuming duty was looking after shipwrecked and sick Americans. For instance, the ship Mary Ellen of Boston under Captain Thomas M. Dearborn was wrecked and totally lost with the cargo off the island of Subai on 9th February 1847 on her way from Whampoa to New York. The whole surviving party later arrived in Singapore, and it was Balestier's responsibility to take charge and supply them with board and accommodation until it was possible to send them to the U.S. Quite often, too, Balestier had to pay for the care of sick American sailors brought from elsewhere in the region. A slightly different case was when the colonial government of Western Australia submitted to Balestier claims for the maintenance and hospital expenses incurred by that government for an American seaman named Chamberlain, who was landed at Perth in a crippled state by the commander of the ship Mars of New Bedford, Massachusetts. Chamberlain had been admitted to the government hospital on the understanding that the commander of the ship would shortly return to Perth and pay all the expenses. But after waiting and not hearing from him, Chamberlain was sent to Balestier together with the claims. Balestier, however, was not authorized to spend public money beyond the limits of his consular district, and so he had to transmit the papers to Washington. Perhaps one of the most important but difficult tasks of Balestier was when a group of mandarins from the King of Cochin China came to Singapore in 1846 demanding redress from the American consulate for ill treatment received at the hands of the commander of the Constitution. The Constitution, which anchored in Turong Bay, was cordially received and supplied with wood and water. Later, however, the captain and a party of men came to shore and ordered the mandarins to deliver some French priests. When the mandarins professed ignorance, they were handcuffed and humiliated in the presence of their dependents and servants, and finally taken to the Constitution, where they were kept prisoners and daily threatened with execution if the French Catholic priests were not delivered. On another day, many boats from the Constitution consisting of armed men went ashore and there fired upon the curious crowd, killing 17 men, women, and children. In addition, the Constitution destroyed the fort and also fired at rice junks on the river, causing further loss of lives and property. Balestier realized the seriousness of this problem, as it would undoubtedly affect American trade in the area. Although he was fully aware of the importance of redressing the injured, Balestier was helpless, and all that he could do was to explain to the mandarins that he had no power to act on such a grave matter, and requested them to assure their king that he would transmit any communication from the sovereign to the president of the U.S. But the King of Cochin China considered it a great insult to enter into foreign correspondence, and so the matter was left unsettled. The result was that Americans did not dare to trade with Cochin China, especially when some innocent shipwrecked Americans caught by them had been tortured. It was in order to alleviate this unfortunate impression that Balestier stressed the importance of rewarding the Raja of Subai for his hospitality towards the crew of the Mary Ellen, and thereby perhaps regain trading privileges in the area. One other serious problem faced by Balestier was that of piracy. In October 1838, for instance, Balestier received several documents from John Reevely, American consular agent at Penang, relating to the robbery of the bark Eclipse to the amount of $18,000 Spanish, and 4 cases of opium and the murder of Captain Wilkins. Balestier expeditiously wrote to the consuls at Canton, Manila, and Batavia, asking them to inform any one of the commanders of the U.S. ships about the incident. Other than this, there was nothing Balestier could do. In a letter to Washington, he stressed the importance of placing a small naval force in Singapore. Under ordinary circumstances, one large sloop of war would be sufficient, and Balestier asked that 2 such vessels be provided to cope with all exigencies. With regards to piracy, Balestier wrote nothing but the knowledge that there is a force at hand ready to punish them will ensure the lives and property exposed on the seas. In one of his early reports to the Secretary of State, Balestier had written that on more than one occasion, American missionaries have found the advantage of having an American consul in Singapore. American missionary activities had indeed been quite considerable, and although there is not much correspondence showing Balestier's role in this, his help and advice must have been sought. The first mention of American missionaries in Singapore was in 1833. In 1834, Singapore was officially established as a mission station under the American Board of Commissioners of Foreign Missions. Singapore, in fact, became a depot for American missionaries bound for China, for here they gathered where they could study Chinese and further prepare themselves for the work in China. In June 1835, Reverend Parker, a medical missionary, suggested a plan for a colony from America to be located in any suitable place within the Straits. This was in order to provide an opportunity for young Americans willing to visit any part of the world and to concentrate their exertions with the very laudable object of effectually diffusing among their less fortunate brethren the arts and sciences of civilized nations together with the blessings of Christianity. This was really part of a bigger plan, that of forming a colonization society in America in order to assemble, equip, and send forth the colonists to their destined places of settlement. And the object of such colonies was to improve the agriculture, the manufactures, the commerce, the ordinary arts of living, and the moral and intellectual character of the people among whom they settled. In December 1836, the American brig Himalay, under Captain A.V. Fraser, was instructed by Oliphant and Company of Canton to make a tour of Borneo and Celebes with the dual purpose of looking into the commercial and missionary possibilities there. On board was Reverend James T. Dixon. Among other things, the instructions stated, "On arriving at Singapore, you will hand the accompanying letter of introduction to Mr. Balestier and endeavor to collect from him all the information you need on your subsequent voyage. Mr. Balestier will aid you in preparing a small investment for Borneo of such articles as they like there." In January 1837, Balestier received a letter from the Reverend Josiah S. Trevelyan of Pennsylvania, a resident missionary in Singapore, containing a resolution of the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, which was to prepare a building for the accommodation of such sick American seamen free of charge as Balestier thought needed medical assistance. Balestier was very enthusiastic about the project and described it as an offer so truly Christian and benevolent, and which can be appreciated truly only by those who, from personal experience, know the sufferings and privations to which our seamen requiring medical assistance are liable in a place wholly unprovided with an hospital. Unfortunately, however, this project fell through because the secretary of the board considered the scheme far too expensive.